It's mid-1917 and the First World War has become a slow-motion nightmare, a meat grinder of dirt, blood and wasted lives. Across the Western Front, men are dying in the thousands for gains measured in metres. The battlefields of France and Belgium have been churned into a toxic soup of mud, wire and broken bodies. There are no more sweeping offensives, no more bold manoeuvres. The days of noble cavalry charges and fast-moving campaigns are long gone. This is trench warfare, static, slow and suffocating. But beneath the surface, a different kind of war was taking shape. Literally beneath the surface. Because while soldiers above exchanged rifle fire and dodged gas attacks, a secret subterranean war was raging underground. A game of tunnels, counter-tunnels and high-powered explosives. And nowhere was this underground chess match waged more audaciously or destructively than at a lonely rise just outside the Belgium city of Ypres, known as Hill 60. Hill 60 wasn't much to look at from above, a man-made mound created from the soil dug out during a railway construction. It was called Hill 60 due to its elevation, 60 metres above sea level. And as ordinary and unspectacular as it may have seemed, Hill 60 offered commanding views of the battlefield and surrounding terrain in what was an otherwise incredibly flat region. And in this kind of war, a useful vantage point could mean all the difference. Whoever held the hill could see, could shoot, could shell. And in mid-1917, the Germans held it. From up on Hill 60, the Germans had clear observation across all Allied lines, and any troop movement on the ground was instantly detectable, especially in the direction of Ypres. Artillery spotters on the hill were able to direct explosive shells with devastating accuracy, and they were milking this advantage for all it was worth. And the Allies, well, they didn't like that. But taking Hill 60 by waging an above-ground assault would mean certain death. The Germans had turned the hill into a fortress. Bunkers, machine gun nests, and artillery, all with perfect line of sight across no man's land, lined the hill. Any frontal attack would have turned into a massacre before the first man even cleared the trench. So, if not over, the Allies would have to go under. A new kind of soldier was needed. Enter the tunnellers. And not just any tunnellers. This job would fall to a group of hardened men from half a world away. The first Australian tunnelling company. Miners, engineers, ex-labourers, all hand-picked from the depths of the Australian coal country and thrown into one of the darkest and most dangerous jobs of the war. Their assignment? To covertly tunnel hundreds of metres beneath no man's land, digging directly under a heavily fortified German stronghold to lay one of the biggest explosive charges the war had ever seen, all without being detected. The work was slow, suffocating and terrifying. They worked in silenced, hunch-over in narrow tunnels, sometimes no wider than a coffin. The air was damp and foul. The heat was unbearable. There was no light but the flicker of carbide lamps. They hacked through the clay inch by inch, laying timber supports as they went and constantly pumping out groundwater to stop the shafts from flooding. And always, they listened. The Germans were tunnelling too, digging toward them from the opposite direction, hoping to intercept or destroy the Allied galleries. The Australians would press their ears to the wall using devices like geophones to detect even the faintest scratching of a German pickaxe. Sometimes the enemy would break through, suddenly and violently, and underground gunfights would erupt in the pitch black. These needed to be won quickly, with no survivors left to flee and inform the Germans. Other times they'd hear digging stop and go dead quiet. And that was even worse, because it often meant the Germans were packing explosives, setting their own charges to try and blow the tunnel and everyone in it to pieces. The Australians dug decoy tunnels to confuse enemy listeners. They laid trap wires, booby traps, and even listening posts. It was a silent war beneath the war, fought in suffocating dark, under the constant threat of cave-ins, gas, or death by explosions. And yet the Aussies held steady. Once they'd reached their target deep beneath the German stronghold, the Aussies got to work packing the chamber with explosives. They used over 50,000 pounds of aminal, a powerful chemical explosive far more stable than dynamite, but still volatile under pressure. Every bag had to be hauled in by hand, carefully stacked and wired with precision. The detonators were installed with painstaking care. Any static, any spark, any mistake could have triggered the blast early. And still, they worked on, calm, focused, and knowing the fate of thousands above them depended on what they were doing down below. For months, they fought this secret underground war, keeping the tunnels from collapsing, ensuring their explosives didn't sweat, degrade, or detonate early. One wrong move, a cough, a pickaxe scrape, the echo of a boot, and the entire hillside could blow sky high with them still inside. But the timing of the final detonation wasn't up to them. Hill 60 was just one part of a much larger plan, part of a coordinated assault across the Messines Ridge. 19 separate mines had been planted along the front, all set to detonate at the exact same time, in what would become at that time the most devastating series of explosions in human history. If the charge at Hill 60 went off early, it could blow the whole operation. The Germans would know the game, they'd know to expect an attack from below at other locations, and they'd reinforce their positions. And so, in dark, narrow shafts, the men of the 1st Australian Tunnelling Company waited. And then one day, on June 7, 1917, the order finally came through. It was 3:10 a.m, a still night, and a silent one but for the sweeping winds across no man's land. And then, without warning, boom. The earth convulsed. Hill 60 erupted in fire, steel, and stone. The blast was so massive it was heard all the way back in London, and the vibrations felt in Dublin. A crater the size of a football field yawned where the German positions had once stood. Machine guns, trenches, bunkers, all vaporized in an instant. British and Australian troops stormed the ruins and took what remained of the hill with barely a shot fired. The Germans who survived were dazed, buried, or already fleeing, and the battle was over in minutes. The explosion at Hill 60 and others along the Messines Ridge shattered the German front line. In just a few hours, the Allies captured key positions they had been fighting over for years. The victory at Messines gave them the high ground south of Ypres, setting the stage for the much larger Passchendaele offensive that would follow. That battle would go on to become one of the most prolonged and disastrous campaigns of the war, fought in relentless rain, waist-deep mud, and at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. So Hill 60 didn't end the war, but for a moment it showed that with careful planning, engineering, and courage, trench warfare could be broken, and that sometimes the biggest impact can come from those you'd least expect. Today, you can still visit Hill 60. The ground is quiet now. The craters remain, but beneath your feet, deep in the earth, lie the ghosts of a war fought in silence. The war beneath the war. And the legacy of a group of Aussie diggers who turned mud and darkness into thunder. For more epic tales from the War Stories archive, hit that subscribe button to enlist today. Then, pick one of the stories on screen to select your next mission. Over and out, soldier.